Good morning, all. I've been told I have to change my profile picture. That's what I look like. That's what I looked like 2 years ago. Work my way through this report. So I will give you, in some ways, it will be a whistle-stop tour through this almost 500-page State of the Environment report. But I would recommend to all that you delve into it and find something that's useful to you in the work that you do. Just to give you an overview of the report, we have an executive summary in which the executive summary sets out some of our key findings, but also gives you all of the chapter-related messages and key insights that we have on each of the chapters of the report. It covers thematic areas, so whether it be air, noise, water, or climate. It also covers sectoral assessments, so we look across whether it be transport and the environment, energy and the environment, agriculture and the environment, looking at how these things interact, both as pressures and impacts from the environment on these sectors. In our third section of our report, we also look at our implementation, and you've heard Laura talk about the implementation gap. So here we do an assessment of how well we're doing vis-a-vis what we plan to do. This is a once in 4 year report, so it does give us this snapshot of where we are in the environment. So I'm going to give you a quick tour through the report. Much of the rest of the conference will give you more in-depth assessments, and our chapter authors will provide that to you. But we have, as Laura said, we've come through it. We're a changed country. Our population has gone from the early 1970s from 3 million up to 5 million, substantial increase. I think one of the eye-watering statistics on the screen there is the number of cars has gone from 500,000 to nearly 3. So there's substantial changes in our society over the last 50 years. And the report does look back and forward across this nexus to see how things have changed over time. Looking at some of the thematic challenges we have, I'll start at the beginning and work my way through. On air quality, as you can see, from an ambient air quality perspective, we have two substantial issues. One is the burning of fossil fuels in our heating in our homes, and the second is those transport-related emissions, because they're close to people and they do have the impact on people's health. We have, I suppose, one of the things that the report shows us is we have had a substantial transition. We now have much better information, much better monitoring system. So we've gone from having a fairly slim national monitoring system for air quality now to having over 117 stations providing us with substantial information on the quality of our air quality. You will hear later from the speakers on air on how we're using this to forecast and how we're using this to provide people with health-related information from it. But while we know lots more about the air quality, and Ireland is complying with the current air quality standards that's set at the European level, there is World Health Organization standards that are guidelines that have been developed, which are substantially tighter. And I suppose from one of the transitions we've seen is the Clean Air Strategy for Ireland. Our government policy has set out that we will move towards compliance with those WHO guidelines by 2040, meeting certain milestones in 2026 and other periods throughout this. So I suppose from an air quality perspective, we see this as a substantial challenge to deliver, but we do recognise the substantial benefits that we will get from delivering on that for our health and well-being. We also have, in relation to our national air emissions targets, we have targets around ammonia, which we are not currently meeting, and that is, again, one of those areas that Ireland needs to have full implementation of mitigation measures to deliver on compliance. On environmental noise, and again, one of the key themes that I've found from working on this report is our information has substantially been upgraded. Well, within the last 4 years, a strategic noise mapping for the country has been undertaken. This looks at major urban areas, including Dublin, Cork and Limerick, cities over 100,000. It's looked at major national roads with a large number of vehicles travelling on them. And this has been done at a much deeper scale than we had previously, looking at all the roads within these agglomerations and all of the major roads. So we have substantially better information. But that is telling us that there is a lot of people who are exposed to levels of noise which are above reporting thresholds, but also above levels that the WHO considers can impact health. So that work is leading on. We have to implement work to mitigate those noise impacts, and that is done through noise action plans. And EPA, as part of its assessment of local authority performance, is finding that noise action plans, while many of them were in place for the third cycle, need to step up their level of performance to deliver the mitigations of noise that are required. It has not been as good as it should be, and this will be a key area for us to achieve to achieve both the Green Deal targets and our own national ambition to protect people from exposure to noise. On climate, I think the story is well known in Ireland, but we do have a substantial level of greenhouse gas emissions in this country in comparison with our rest of our European colleagues. National targets and budgets have been set at sectoral levels, and we have a very substantial challenge to deliver on those. Currently, the projections from EPA are suggesting that we will achieve a 29% reduction by 2030. Clearly, more needs to be done on climate mitigation. And we have, as I say, climate budgets that we need to make sure that they are legally and statutorily set that we have to comply with. Now, while mitigation is one piece, we have also developed the knowledge base around climate. And one of the things we've done is EPA published, in conjunction with a lot of authors from across many academic institutions and many other institutions, a climate change assessment this year, which sets out the state of knowledge on where we're at and what we need to do. So this is substantially informing our actions going forward. There's also a National Climate Change Risk Assessment, which is ongoing, due to be delivered in 2025, which will help us define which actions need to be delivered to address this. And that really brings out one of the key messages that we find in this chapter is, while there is a substantial body of work going on climate mitigation, climate adaptation, we need to strengthen our work in this space to deliver and protect both ourselves and our environmental assets from the impacts of climate change, which is happening here and now. On land, following with the theme, we have much better information. We have a national land cover map, which gives us much better, more refined and granulated information on how we are currently using our land within this country. And there is lots of needs for land. So whatever target that you're looking for, whether it be in relation to agricultural targets, biodiversity targets, whether you're looking at it in relation to mobility targets, all of them will have a demand on land. And we're seeing this demand on land as something that has to be recognised, but we also need to look at how it will be addressed. Sorry, I'll go back one. In this space, what we're seeing is there's a need for a multifunctional approach here to look at how land can service many needs at the same time. And there is emerging research and evidence that is detailed in the report where you can hit both economic, social, and environmental targets at the same time by the approaches that you take. So there is ways that we can move forward in this space. On soil health, I suppose even for me, I've been an environmental scientist for 30 plus years, the recognition of how important our soils is was something that really came home to me when writing this report, when this report was being developed. It is an ecosystem in itself. It supports 95% of our food production. It is the basis on which we really do depend, and soil health is critical in this space. What we're finding is at an EU level, we have an EU soil strategy, and there is a soil monitoring law which is in development at the moment. And taking those into context, in Ireland, what we're seeing is that we need to look at improving our mapping and modelling of this to inform how soils will be protected and managed into the future. Another element in relation to soils that we've seen is the need to recognise that it could either be a carbon sink or a carbon source. Currently, our soils are carbon sources in this country, and this is, again, part of both our climate challenges, but also relates to how that land will be used into the future. So there is a substantial piece of work to be done on how our land management is progressed. There is a land use review going on in the country. Phase 1 has been delivered, but the second phase of that is still working forward. So that will provide a lot of the evidence to inform this decision making. One critical thing we did notice is in this space that over 70% of land is in private ownership. And as a consequence of that, it will need substantial dialogue with stakeholders and landowners in how we achieve some of the targets that we're talking about. On nature, we are seeing many, many pressures, both direct and indirect. And those indirect pressures drivers, both indirect and direct. And we are seeing a lot of pressure coming on our national environment. While we have information in the report on the state of our conservation status of our protected lands, our designated areas, there is some gaps. There is a substantial gap in relation to the quality of nature outside of those areas. But some of the evidence in the report covers that over half our native plants are in decline. Over half our bee species are at risk. the number of birds of conservation, bird species of conservation status, conservation concern is increasing. In summary, we're seeing a nature and a biodiversity which is under threat and under pressure, and substantial work needs to be done to address this. We do have a national biodiversity action plan, and we all know that we've had citizens' assemblies and joint Oireachtas hearings in respect to this. But there's, as Laura would have said earlier on, implementation is king, and we do need to deliver on implementation in this space, but there is a substantial challenge there. I'll move on to water, and it's partially biodiversity still, but also partially other aspects of water. But what we're seeing is almost half of our waters are not at good or better status as is required under the Water Framework Directive. This is the ecological status and has remained relatively static over a number of years. As Laura set out, nutrient levels in our waters are not improving, so we do have a challenge to address this. There is a new water action plan for the country which has recently been published. There is targets in that to achieve improvements in the number of water bodies, to bring them to good status, and other improvements to bring them up the scale of Water Framework Directive status. But substantial challenges there, again, relating to our land, use of land, relating to a variety of pressures, whether they be agricultural, hydromorphological, i.e. the physical condition of the rivers, and pressures from our urban environments and from forestry. So substantial challenges there. Just to move on, I suppose one thing we are seeing is in the south of our country, we are seeing an that as we say, the nutrient levels are not improving, and there's particular challenges with regard to our estuarine systems in the south and southeast of the country. So that is a particular issue and does relate to the levels of nutrients, and specifically nitrogen in those environments. As you can see, transitional waters is probably our least well-performing sector in that space. On our marine environment, Ireland has a very substantial marine area, far bigger than our land area. And what we're seeing is these areas are still in relatively good condition, albeit they are under pressure. So there are pressures from fisheries pressures. There are also more global pressures, for example, from ocean acidification. Sea level rise from us living on the land looking out at it is again a challenge for Ireland. But we have seen an increase in the number of protected areas, whether they be SPAs or SACs, over the last number of years. There is more to come, and there is more commitments in relation to delivering on those. But that is one of the things that we're going to look at. We're also seeing that there is a need for offshore wind as a big part of our national drive towards climate neutrality. But this will bring in new areas where we will need to put in place renewable infrastructure. And in so doing, there is plan-led approaches that are being put in place to do this. But again, this needs to be done in a way that is sensitive to the environment, protects the environment. Now, we are seeing that there's a complex governance model around these marine areas, and we're very clear that there needs to be good coordination and close coordination between all of those aspects to protect the environment as we move to garner the benefits of offshore wind. On our agriculture, agriculture is a key part and part of the fabric of our country. And as you can see, there is substantial issues that arise from it. It uses 66 to 67% of our land. What we're seeing is there are a number of challenges that come from that use of land. First of all, I've already mentioned those around water, and here's some of the maps that show areas that are challenges around it that have impact on water from a nutrient impact perspective. We also have impacts in relation to biodiversity, and this is one of the key drivers, and probably the key driver of impact on biodiversity. But we also have a climate-related aspect here. So the reduction in emissions from greenhouse gases from this sector is critical to achieve our national targets. So agriculture has substantial challenges across all three of these areas: biodiversity, water quality, and climate. And what we're seeing is, even though there are many plans and programs, probably have a list, do we? Lots of plans and programs and lots of initiatives to deliver on those requirements in the round, as well as all of these plans and programs and their implementation, and all of the good practices that we're seeing being delivered on farm. Collectively, they are not moving us quickly enough to reach the targets that we've set for ourselves. Jenny Deacon, who authored this chapter, will give a more fulsome, a more clear perspective of that, but there is a substantial challenge in that space. Moving on to our transport system. I suppose transport is just around 1/5 of our greenhouse gas emissions, and most of that is coming from our road transport system, nearly 95%. We are seeing shifts and moves within that fleet of vehicles. We are seeing, as you can see, the yellow bars and the blue bars, we are seeing more battery electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and moving into this space. But we are still seeing that there is a substantial number of new vehicles going on, both diesel and petrol vehicles, into this space. And this is one of those sectors that will be very hard to decarbonise. What we are seeing again, and as I say, one of the things that when you look at this over a 4-year period, you see there are lots of plans and programs and drivers that have been developed over that period of time. I won't go through all of them, but what I would say is when they're looked at in the main and in the round, when you look at the National Sustainable Mobility Policy, when you look at the draft National Demand, transport demand policies, all of them are seeking to move us towards the sustainable mobility model. So there is a piece in here where we're seeing that there's lots of good things happening here. So we are seeing increasing numbers of people on public transport, more active transport happening. But because we have this large dependency on fossil-fueled vehicles, we still need to make more. So we are seeing in this space there's need for good engagement between planning and transport planning to make sure that we can move more easily through our society without having these impacts. It's good for us and it's good for our health, whether we're doing active transport, and we'll also deliver on some of these targets. So the sustainable mobility drive is clear, but there's still more work to be done on it. When we look at our use of energy in the country, as you can see, there's a very heavy load from fossil-fueled energy requirements. So this is not just our electricity load, this is across all use of energy. So we're seeing that it's still around 80%, which has been round about that for a large period of time. However, the percentage of renewables is growing, and we are seeing that there is substantial moves to provide the circumstances which will enable more renewables into the system here. So it is a positive move. But what we are seeing is that in itself will substantially will have benefits, but there are many areas where action will be required to move us to a carbon neutral basically system or energy system across many policy areas. We're seeing action in each one of them, but there is need for this to be scaled up and sped up to deliver on our 2030 and 2050 targets. In relation to industry, as Laura said, we are seeing that in the main there is a high level of compliance within Irish industry with environmental permits and permissions, but there are still areas and pockets where we're seeing that there's levels of poor compliance, especially around our food and drink and waste sectors, which are overly represented when we do look at compliance and issues that are coming in this. On the positives, however, we are seeing that emissions reductions across this, but that in itself will not get us to where we need to get to, and the new Industrial Emissions Directive will require a lot more of industry to deliver that climate neutrality and more environmentally sustainable industry over the coming years. We are seeing some examples where industry is delivering improvements and is going beyond compliance, but this will have to become the norm rather than some of the good examples that we currently have. As Laura set out, our fifth key message was the relationship between our environment and our health. So across our exposures and our harmful exposures from air pollution, noise, chemicals that we'll be exposed to, and of course water issues, there are clear reasons for us to modify the impacts that we are having, that these exposures will have on us. They are modifiable. They are things that we can address over time. But we're also seeing this move towards a One Health approach in which the environment is recognised as both having an ability to mitigate some of those impacts on us, but as also a conduit by which we maybe have some of those exposures to us. And critical in spaces like this would be antimicrobial resistance, which can develop from what we put into the environment, developing new issues for ourselves. So it's critical that we have a healthy, biodiverse environment, because that provides higher levels of protection for our health and well-being, while also providing the positive benefits that we've seen elsewhere. On our circular economy, Ireland still has a wasteful linear economy, and it's very clear that we haven't reached the levels of circularity that we would wish to hit. What we're seeing in Ireland is we're seeing growing use of materials, and our recycling and reuse rates not keeping pace with that growth. So there is, for ourselves in this space, a need to scale up both investment and action to achieve this. EPA has produced a number of byproduct decisions and end-of-waste decisions that will enable some of that move, but we do have a lot of work to do in improving our segregation and treatment of waste. And what we're also seeing is our own national infrastructure is not currently fit to deliver all that we want to deliver. As Laura referenced, we do also have a substantial export of our materials to other countries for recovery and for disposal. Moving on to the final stages of the report, we do have this assessment of how we are complying with environmental standards. And I suppose I won't go into the graphic because it'll probably take all the rest of my time, but we have within this produced a kind of a scorecard where we've looked at how we're performing overall, and there's a number of sub-metrics within that chapter, so these are the overall metrics that we've produced. So while we're stating our current assessment for climate is that it is poor, and that our outlook, while we are positive things happening, we are not going to meet the targets we've set, and there's a substantial uptick and improvement in our delivery required. On air, we are meeting standards that are existing at the moment, but we do need to progress ourselves to meet or comply with the WHO guidelines over time, and that would be a substantial challenge. On nature, as I said, all of the evidence is that it is continuing to degrade, and substantial action is needed to the National Biodiversity Action Plan and its whole of government approach and other actions. We are seeing in there one piece that I suppose we should say, where we have seen improvements. We've seen, for example, increases in the corncrake populations in Ireland over the last few years, following on from investment, following on from focus. So we can make improvements here, and I don't think we should recognise that it does take time, it does take effort, but we can get there if we do try. On our water quality, again, poor, static, and needs to improve, but there is lots of work to be done to deliver on this piece. And on our circular economy, as I've just said, we do need to improve our performance. So in my last few moments, I would just go back to the 5 key priorities that we see that will help us to move to deliver on some of these challenges. Firstly, the need for national policy position on the environment that will, as already been said, look at the interactions, look at the synergies, look at the trade-offs that need to happen between all of these areas so that we actually do deliver what we're intending to do so. We need to drive our implementation, both driving compliance, but also on the delivery of plans and programs that have been set. And I suppose the transformation, and I don't think the scale of the transformations required is extremely substantial and will take a long time, but we need to scale them up, move faster. The faster we get there, the better it'll be for the next generation. On infrastructure, we do need to scale up our investment in this space and not only maintain the existing levels, but look to scale that up to deliver on all the infrastructure that will provide additional mitigation given our growing population and growing economy. And finally, around our health and our environment. I can tell you this evening I'm going to go for a nice walk outdoors, enjoy our nature, because it does protect us from so much of the ills that are around us, but we do need to address those modifiable health risks that will enable us to have longer, healthier lives. So just to finish up, I don't have a slide for acknowledgements, but I would like to acknowledge the editorial team, Brian Donnell and Annette, who did substantial work on this. Over 50 authors have input to this report. We've had over 100 reviewers, many of you in the room today, so my thanks to you. I'd also like to thank our analytics unit who produced the fantastic graphics that made my presentation look good. And I also, other parts of the EPA who are too numerous to mention, who have really enabled us to pull this assessment together. So hopefully you will all over the next year, 2 years, use this integrated assessment to inform your work and help us deliver the clean and healthy environment we all want. Thank you.